This talk I gave to the International 185 Club at the beginning of EAA Airventure. I talk about a really good way to avoid dying as a pilot of a general aviation plane. I appreciate Alex inviting me and the club for having me out. And if you're not a pilot, there's still a lot you can take away from this. And I'm going to go over 4 aviation incidents in this keynote.
Thank you, guys. Superior judgment trumps superior skills. Another way to put it, do this to not die. Okay. The aviation community is very small. And when you look at a model group like you guys, it's even tighter. And when Alex reached out to me to speak, I asked, what do you want me to speak on? And I had recently done a report on the prelim that came out from the NTSB on the 2-hour strikes. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And the more I thought about it, you see, if I died in my plane, I would want my choices, my decisions, my lack of decisions, if they could help you survive something, I would want that. And I decided, let's go ahead and talk about those. I do understand in a Cessna 180, 185 club, when we have 2 Cessna 180s that crash within 60 hours of each other, that probably there's somebody here that knows people. And so we are going to be as sensitive as possible. But we're going to take away what can make us better people and better pilots. Before I get to those 2 stories, I want to tell you about a story that you probably haven't heard. You see, there was this small business owner out of Dallas, and he's a plane owner, and he got a gig in Hondo, Texas. Some of you might know where that is. And he hired a couple of people out of Dallas, and he hired another person out of New Braunfels to help with this job in Hondo all day long. He'd flown down with his people, and he picked up the guy in New Braunfels. They worked at Hondo into the evening, and then it was time to go back. We retraced those steps. So he loaded up this plane. It was a Cessna 210, and he flew it to New Braunfels and dropped the one guy. Now it's 9 p.m., something like that. And when he dropped off the person, he went ahead and left the engine running. You know, he was somewhat safety conscious, like be aware of the prop, and all that. And so the New Braunfels guy departed behind him. Okay, all that was good. So then he looked at his iPad and looked at the trip from New Braunfels back to, in this case, Fort Worth, Meacham. And actually, he had a small airport, but when he looked at his iPad, the weather was really bad. And he is instrument rated. And actually, this guy, this business owner, was working on his CFI. So he was flying right seat on his plane. The worker that he hired one of them happened to also be a pilot as well. And so that person sat left seat, and the business owner could practice being a CFI to get ready for his CFI mission. Now, in looking at it, great flight planning to sit there on the ramp and go, oh, look, we're IFR. We might as well file. The weather was almost at minimums. With, if you know Texas, it began about Waco, but Waco was VFR. And so they filed, and they began the trip. In this case, the worker pilot, whose left seat was pilot flying, and the owner was pilot monitoring this case. As they got closer and they passed Waco, and now they're into the weather, he kept looking, the owner on the right seat, kept looking at the weather, and it was right at minimums. And ATC told him that the plane right before him did barely just get in. What are your intentions? Well, let's continue. So he couldn't go to his own little airport. It didn't even have an approach, so he was doing Fort Worth Meacham. And he told his left seat guy, he said, look, I know my plane more than you do, so I'm going to go ahead and fly this approach. So using the autopilot, which is good, that's, single pilot resource, he got vectored around, he came in, and being in the right seat, let me describe the instrumentation that he had to help you guys. Had a 430 WASP, all right? He had a really simple, older legacy little glass panel, okay? A legacy Aspen. And he had the original autopilot with, from the 70s in this deal. It wasn't great, all right? So he's gonna shoot this approach to minimums. Gets vectored around from the right seat, and he can't really just see everything really good on the instruments. The stuff that he had, the old analog stuff, is fogged up and not great anymore. But he's looking. He gets established on the approach way too fast because he didn't even look at his airspeed. Autopilot could not hold up. Left seat pilot, who knows enough, says full deflection, and so he goes around, goes missed. Okay, that was a good call for this owner pilot, right? So he goes missed, and he says, let's try it again. This time, okay, autopilot, he doesn't know that he was too fast, by the way. So he goes, I guess the autopilot, being old, just can't handle it, so I'm gonna hand fly this. Now this owner pilot, instrument rated, CFI candidate, has not really done very much hand flying since he got his IFR ticket, right? So he's been relying on that autopilot. But he's thinking, well, the autopilot's meant, I'll just hand fly. I'm Superman, I'm super pilot, no worries. So he comes around again, gets vectored in, and he's coming in now, hand flying, and it's worse. So they go missed again. Now at this point, the owner at least has a little bit of wherewithal to say, okay, let's plan this. And by the way, he had plenty of fuel. Fuel was not an issue, okay? He still at this point had 2 hours of fuel. So he looked at his left seat pilot and he said, okay, I'm gonna do it one more time. If I don't make it, we'll fly to Waco, which is VFR right now. And we'll stomp there. The crew person in the back probably didn't even know what was going on, but they line up one more time. This time, the owner from the right seat decides to do a hybrid approach. So kind of hand fly, kind of autopilot. And he used the heading bug. So to be able to steer it, instead of trying to hold everything, he turned the autopilot on, did the heading bug, came down, minimums, tower, knows this is the 3rd time. Tower's like, we've turned the lights up full for you. He doesn't see anything. He's at DA, decision altitude, nothing. He holds that, and he sees something. It's the rabbits. And he's able to continue. He's a bit off, but is able to adjust and bring that plane down on the runway. And they come to a stop. He taxis to the FBO, gets those precious souls off the plane. He takes a picture of the plane in the fog, and he keeps that as a remembrance. That superior judgment trumps superior skills, because you see that pilot. I'm not speculating on what he was thinking about, because that pilot was me. I was that owner in the right seat, making those calls. And I realized how close and how different this story could have ended. I thought my superior skills can get me out of everything. And we got lucky that night. But I am not Han Solo, even though I think I am sometimes, and I'm not Superman. And I learned a really big lesson that night that I need to know myself. I need to know who I am so I can address the weaknesses and I can account for the things that I might make that are bad decisions. And so it's in that light that now let's move to the two cases I'm sure most of you have heard about. The two Cessna 180s that crashed within 16 hours of each other from wire strikes. Back, I think it's in April. All right, let's talk about the first one. I've got the NTSB prelude report right here. Okay. On April 18th, 2025, a Cessna 180 was substantially damaged near Fremont, Nebraska. In this case, Dan Williams was a very experienced pilot. People knew him, knew that he flew well. He was a great pilot. Stole champion, doing all this kind of stuff. And he had just gotten married. And he and his wife flew up to Fremont, and it was toward the end of the day. And they had a couple of friends meeting them at the airport to give them a ride to where they were going that night. Dan had talked to a couple of those friends that came to see them and pick them up. And they had wanted a ride up the river. So Dan had agreed to give them the ride up the river. His wife, his new bride, said, Dan, it's getting dark. I don't think it's a good idea. Dan loaded up with his two friends. The wife stayed behind. She wasn't going to do it. Within a few minutes, they were up the river. One passenger sent a photo to his son, another a Snapchat, and a few minutes after that, Dan hit a wire. A witness saw it, said the plane actually hit the wire and then started to climb. He thought it was going to be okay. The plane came straight down in the water. All three people died. Superior judgment trumps superior skills. So, not speculating, but there's a lot that we can learn here and take away. Know yourself. What's your propensity? All right, let's go to the other one that happened just a few hours later. The next day, this time, Ross Nelson is a relatively low time pilot, 300 total hours, and he's got his Cessna 180. Now, he's flying cross country. He had flown to Muhlenberg in Kentucky, which I've flown there many times. It's a favorite fuel stop of mine. He had fueled up there, then went another place. He had 3 people with him. And then it was time to go back home north to Illinois. And he flew back to Muhlenberg because one of his passengers had forgotten something. He filled up a little bit more fuel and took off. By the way, the weather was bad. Now Ross, 300-hour pilot, was not instrument rated. So he did not, as far as we know, fly into IMC. What he did is he kept flying low, lower, lower, until finally a witness talks about hearing a plane that sounded like a crop duster. And she saw it, or he saw it come across, and saw a fireball, and they found the plane. It had clipped a 30-foot power line. So how low do you have to be for that? Broke apart, crashed, spread in a direction that was significantly off their route. So he was certainly trying to figure out what to do. Superior judgment trumps superior skill. All right. Those are those 2 crashes. Now I'm going to tell you another story about something that just happened. 2 days ago, the pilot flying, and he was on his way to Oshkosh 2 days ago. And he had read Interesting story. This pilot likes reading, call it weird, whatever. He likes reading about crashes, right? And trying to figure things out and stuff like that. So he researches a lot. And a prelim report the night before he'd come out on a Cirrus crash that happened in North Carolina on July 7th. So we've done a ton of research. And in this case, it crashed near Raleigh, North Carolina, and had taken off from Cocoa Beach, Florida. And within 20 some odd minutes after taking off, the pilot had radioed that he was having radio trouble and electrical problems, quote, and that ATC should put a note down in case they lose this information. He knows he's got an electrical problem. He knows he's going to lose a radio. And he continues an hour and a half flight. The short story on that. Father, husband, his wife, his 10-year-old, and his 9-year-old crashed 5 miles away from their destination airport in Cirrus. Everybody's gone. Superior judgment trumps superior skills. Now, this pilot going to Oshkosh 2 days ago had studied that crash, and he was about 20 minutes from his destination for a stop on the way to Oshkosh. And it was a destination he was going to spend the night at anyway. So he's flying along, 20 minutes out, and he starts to smell something burning. Okay? He looks back at his passenger in the back seat, because earlier in the trip he had opened up like some beef jerky or something and filled the cabin with the smell, right? So he's like, "Did you open something?" He's like, "No, I didn't open anything." Then the other passenger says, "Hey, your low voltage enunciator's on." Okay, we got a burning smell like burning rubber, and we got a low voltage enunciator. In this case, this pilot, who's, by the way, on IFR flight plan, but he was in VMC, okay? So he wasn't in IMC. He went ahead and talked to ATC, told them that he had a low voltage enunciator. He wanted to cancel IFR, let's go flight following, and his intentions were to continue the 20 minutes, they're pretty close, to get to the destination. You're within the battery on that. So then that pilot grabbed the checklist, the emergency checklist that he keeps, and he grabbed the fire extinguisher, handed it to his passenger that was sitting with him, and they ran the drill of everything that happens on a cabin fire. It's one of the few times in this emergency, you actually want to lose altitude. So he brought the plane down to 3,000 feet. Because if you do have a cabin fire, you want to get down fast. You want to be, he was at 11,000 before. So you don't want to, have a 10-minute descent or something. So he did that, and as he was looking at everything and thinking about that Cirrus, he went ahead and said the words over the radio. "ATC, I'm declaring an emergency." Okay, it cost nothing to do that. Okay? And he had a DPE, and the DPE's words were ringing in his ears because he talked to him about another crash, the 737 American Airlines that caught fire at the gate in Denver. He had talked to his DPE because his DPE was a line check airman, and that DPE said, had they stopped, they knew they had trouble, they'd stopped on the runway, had ARF come and look at it, they might have been able to see something. And he tells all the people that he trains, emergencies are free. And these guys need the practice, help them. I go back to my early training days, my IFR training days. I was toward the end of my training IFR. I was in a 172 with a G1000, and I get a low voltage indicator as we were coming in after flying. So we were 5 minutes out from the airport. My instructor tells me this: Tell the tower you've got a low voltage indicator, but make sure you tell them that this is not an emergency. She, law of primacy, the first thing she learned, she had instilled in me that there was a mountain of trouble awaiting me if I declared an emergency. Okay? And a lot of people think that to this day. Some of you might think that in this room. Okay, let's go back to Friday, 2 days ago. This pilot declared the emergency. He told them right off, I'm declaring an emergency. My intentions, landing runway 8 right, and I've got 3 souls on board and 30 gallons of fuel. And they cleared the way for him. It was smooth. He had airports lined up in case something happened. The smoke, by the way, the smoke smell had gone away when he turned off the alternator and ran the checklist and everything else. So he took off as much load as he could off the battery. Landed, everything was fine. 4 fire trucks were waiting for him. And he got out and he spent maybe 4 minutes answering the questions as the guy filled out his form. And I have no doubt in 3 weeks he'll get a call from the FSDO who will ask him what was the result, and he'll say, I had a bad alternator, we replaced it, and it's back in service, or whatever it's going to be, right? And again, guess who that pilot is? It's me. That's why I'm not speculating on what that pilot was saying. This time, I'm not hesitant to call the emergency. Now, I will tell you, Friday night, I had friends, we were already planning to stay there, so I had accommodations and everything else. As I stayed there in the room that night, and I thought about it, I had called my mechanic, we had been chasing a very small oil leak that's back there anyway, and it splattered oil here and there, and we knew that. But it wasn't enough. We were working on it, and it wasn't enough for me to, cancel the flying or anything else. My theory, and his, was that we got some oil on the alternator belt, and it has slipped. That's why we got the low voltage, and that's why we smelled the burning. So I was like, so did I call emergency for nothing? Blah, blah, blah. Well, then we go to yesterday morning. I go to the airport, to the wonderful people, Spirit St. Louis Airport. I go to the wonderful people that are helping me, the owner and his AMPIA, and we clean it up real good. We don't see any obvious, smoking guns, literally. So we charge the battery up, takes a couple hours, then we do a ground run. I put it on the apron, we get it up, and the smell, now turn on everything, the smell comes back. And you can smell it too. So then we shut down, I get out, there is smoke billowing out of my alternator. Okay? So, all right, now you've heard that. Let me tell you a little bit more about, knowing yourself. So, okay. So from that foggy picture that I keep with me for the superior judgment from superior skills. So I know I force it. Okay, I'm a very forcing person. I'm very prone to get theiritis. Okay, I want to get there because probably different than most of you, I don't fly for fun. I run a small business. I have film clients, corporate clients that need video shoots or whatever, and they're expecting me to be shooting at 9 a.m. In this case, we left Friday, right? And with a stopover in St. Louis, and to come into Airventure yesterday, I have a shoot that was today, a TV show that we were shooting. But I had to be here. So the get there-itis is already there, so what do? Tell me that, oh, Dan, you shouldn't have get there-itis? Well, just fly commercial. Well, you could say a lot of different things, but here's what I've come up with. I know I'm susceptible to get there-itis, so I have a plan. And the plan came about. This probably screams warning signs, but 2 years ago, I left Airventure with a young man, a 22-year-old Kentuckian, who's got that good Kentucky drawl. Love you, Kentucky people. And he was a 22-year-old who was very good pilot. We were flying at night in the panhandle of Texas. We'd just taken off in the low voltage annunciator come on. Different reason, maybe. But we went ahead and landed right away at the nearest airport. I pulled the cow and I'm checking everything and is the belt tight, all this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to, turn it back on, trying different stuff. And he goes, well, Dan, I just think you got some get-there-itis. And I sat there and went, all right, let's book the hotel room. So, all of that's to say, I have a plan now from that incident. And the plan is, when I gotta travel, I create plan B and plan C for when I get to the airport. And if the plane is not in if it's in a no-go situation, I'm gonna now do this. And it'll get me there for the client. If I'm gonna have trouble en route, I'm going to do this and that and whatever. If, like in the case of St. Louis, if I'm gonna land there, what's my plan, blah, blah, blah. I had all this written out the day before. And it's not enough for me to just write it out. I have some pilot friends of mine that I send this to, accountability. And I also, my crew people that were traveling with me, I sent it to them as well. This is, a day or two before we ever cranked up the engine. So have a plan. Know yourself and have a plan. All right. There's a lot of psychology to the know yourself. Maybe think of it like AA. The first step is admitting you have a problem, right? I have get-there-itis. What about you? Which pilot are you? Are you the first pilot, the owner, who didn't really think it through and, flying by the seat of his pants because he thinks he's Han Solo? Are you Dan Williams, very experienced pilot? Are you Ross, who very low time pilot, without the IFR? And if you are you the last pilot? Me again, but this time, hopefully a little bit smarter, making that emergency call or whatever, just to make sure everything's safe. Had the fire popped up, by then I could certainly call an emergency, but now it was all set up. Time becomes really critical. Emergencies are free. Anyway, think about it. Ask yourself, which pilot are you? What are your weaknesses? What are your, what are you most likely to do? Come up with a plan to help in those situations. Share that plan with people you trust, especially pilots who know, and then execute that plan. These things can save our lives. So I hope you can take them to heart, take them the way I mean. I'm not speculating on Dan or Ross. I don't have to speculate for mine. But there are a lot of things here that you can take. I'm not saying Dan was complacent, being a high-time, experienced, skilled pilot. But we can certainly look at that and go, that reminds me not to become complacent. It can remind me to continue to train. The adage, it's funny, on that flight out from Fort Worth to St. Louis before the emergency, I had my crew person sitting beside me, and I had grabbed the emergency seat, the emergency checklist, showed her where it was, and we had drilled engine out, at altitude. Because I told her, and this is something you guys probably always heard, people do not rise to the occasion, they fall to their level of training. So, what is your training today? I'm asking you hard questions and I mean them. Are you training? When was the last time you ran your emergency checklist as a practice? Let's get real. I've been very transparent with you guys. So, train. That's something we can all do. Even if you're just flying 20 hours a year, whatever it is, or if you're flying 200 hours a year, train, because you're not going to rise to the occasion. You're not going to be Han Solo. That's stuff for movies. You're going to fall to your level of training. And if it's 0, I would be sitting here really scared right now, if I were you. Okay? I'm sorry to be heavy, but I started this off with this can help you not to die. And that's what that is. Knowing yourself, coming up with a plan, executing that plan, and having accountability. So I'll leave you with that, and I hope that this helps, because I don't want to do any more stories on 180 crashes, tail strikes, things that could clearly have been avoided. So thank you guys for your attention. I appreciate it.
Great job.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you can take away the importance of knowing yourself, because that knowledge and the accompanying plan and execution of that plan can keep you and others alive. We're going to be posting a lot more aviation-specific videos on our In the Hangar channel. You can check that out by clicking right there. And I want to thank our sponsors like Colton Mortgage at coltontakingoff.com, residential and refi mortgage help. These guys have incredible and personable help for you, and it's run by a pilot, coltontakingoff.com. And if you haven't checked out this recent report of the Cirrus crash in North Carolina that I mentioned in this talk, you can watch it by clicking right here. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.